G'day, how's it going? Today we are diving into an incredible legal story that kicks off with a bit of a mishap right here in our own Sydney Harbour. It's got everything: spilled oil, a surprise fire, and a court case that completely changed how we think about responsibility.
So let me just ask you this straight up. If you make a mistake, a simple one, are you on the hook for everything that happens afterwards, no matter how strange or out of the blue it is? For a long time, the law's answer to that was pretty much, yeah. And that's where our story begins.
All right, so let's wind the clock back a bit. Before this Aussie case came along and shook everything up, the courts had this really strict rule. It was simple for sure, but as you're about to see, it wasn't always fair.
This old rule, it came from a case called Re Palemis, and it was just incredibly blunt. I mean, it didn't matter one bit if a reasonable person could have ever guessed what would happen. If your mistake directly caused the damage, you were liable. That's it. The chain of events was all that mattered, even if it was a total fluke.
Just look at this chain of events here, which is basically what happened in that old case. A worker, right, negligently knocks over a plank of wood. A pretty minor slip-up. But that one little act starts this unbelievable domino effect that no one saw coming, and boom! Suddenly he could be on the hook for an entire ship. It was a system where one tiny mistake could lead to complete financial ruin.
But then, in 1961, something happened right here in Australia that put that whole idea on trial. And the setting? Our very own Sydney Harbour.
Okay, so here's the story. The crew of a ship, the Wagon Mound, carelessly lets a whole heap of furnace oil spill into the harbor. Now, everyone knew an oil spill was messy, sure, but the scientific advice at the time was that this type of heavy oil just couldn't catch fire on water. But then, some molten metal from welders working nearby falls onto some floating cotton debris. That debris acted like a candle wick, and you guessed it, the whole oil slick went up in flames, causing massive damage to a wharf nearby.
And this, right here, was the absolute heart of the legal fight. The court found that, yeah, spilling the oil was negligent. Of course it was. But the fire itself? It wasn't a foreseeable consequence. The wharf owners argued back, saying, hey, under the old rule, it doesn't matter. The spill directly caused the fire, so you have to pay up. The stage was absolutely set for a legal showdown.
And what came out of that showdown was a massive landmark decision. The court basically said, you know what? That old rule isn't fair, and they brought in a brand new test, a test that would end up rippling right across the common law world. Just have a look at this, because it shows you the huge shift in thinking. The law stopped asking, did your action directly cause the damage, and started asking a much more sensible question, was this type of damage something you could have reasonably seen happening? It totally changed the game from a kind of legal lottery of bizarre outcomes to a standard based on common sense.
So, what do we actually mean by reasonably foreseeable? Well, it's pretty simple, really. It just means what a normal, sensible person standing in your shoes at that moment have thought, hang on, there's a real risk that this sort of thing could happen if I do this. It's not about being a psychic and predicting the exact events, just the general type of harm.
And that became the new rule. The court in the Wagon Mound case decided that because the fire wasn't a foreseeable result of the spill, the ship's owners were not liable for the fire damage. It was just this revolutionary dose of fairness and logic injected right into the law.
All right, so that was all back in 1961. Why are we still talking about it today? Well, because the legacy of this Aussie case is absolutely massive, and it still affects all of us every single day.
The Wagon Mound principle really did four huge things. First, it brought in fairness. You're not on the hook for some freak accident you couldn't have possibly predicted. Second, it created predictability, which is huge for businesses and insurance companies. Third, this idea from down under became the global standard in places like the UK, Canada, you name it. And finally, its modern relevance is undeniable. From a simple car bingle to a major environmental disaster, this is still the test we use.
And that brings us right up to today. The principle itself is simple, but actually applying it in our modern world, well, that gets tricky. In a world with AI, with self-driving cars making split-second choices, and with the massive consequences of climate change, what should we now consider to be foreseeable? The question that was sparked by an oil spill in Sydney all those years ago is, well, more important than ever. What do you reckon?